Hey, it's Mars, and this is Intro to Unity and plyGame Part 2. In this video, we're going to take a look at plyBlox to see how it works, and more importantly, how it's going to enable us to make an entire game without knowing how to code. We'll be using plyBlox in probably every video from here on out, so you will learn how to visually script just by watching future episodes. However, there are 4 things I wanted to touch on before we get started. First is how it works. I'll create an empty game object here in my hierarchy and add a plyBlox component by going to plyGame plyBlox. And this is going to act as a script. So if you have a script on a game object in your current scene, it will run any of the code whenever it has the opportunity to do so. So let's take a look. I'll click this plus button to create a state. I typically don't ever make more than one state. However, it could be useful if you were trying to work on some AI. I'll click on the plus button to create an event. And in our common category are a few I'd like to mention. On start is the first time the game object gets a chance to run the plyBlox in your scene. Then we've got common on enable. That's every time the game object gets turned on. So if I was to turn it off and then turn back on, the events in the on enable will happen every time. And then we've got common on update. That's every frame. And then custom, which we can use our own logic to trigger these events. Let's try making an on start. And in our common category of blocks, I'll use debug. So, since this game object has the plyBlox component, everything in our on start event should happen when I hit play. So our debug could say, this is a test. Now if I hit play, our console should say, this is a test. Perfect. And then, like I said before, we could do a common on enable, and the enable might say I was enabled. So if we hit play, we should get I was enabled, and then if we turn the game object off and back on, we'll get that debug a second time. Let's also try looking for keyboard input. So I'll go to common on update. And now we need a if spacebar goes down. So I'll go to flow for my if block and input. And at the very bottom we've got key go down, and I will choose spacebar. So now on update, this is at 60 frames per second. This would be 60 times a second. If I hit the spacebar, let's do a debug. That's from common. Debug. You hit the spacebar. So if we hit play and I hit the spacebar, we get our debug. As I said before, we'll learn more about events and the types of plyBlox that are available to us just by watching future episodes. However, I did want to touch on a few things in this video, one of those things being variables. So if I go to our common category, we have our booleans, which are yes, no, on, off, true, false. We've got floats, which are fractions or decimals, integers, which are whole numbers, strings, which are letters or words, as well as vector 3's, and that's a set of x, y, and z. So our position, x, y, and z is a vector 3, our rotation, x, y, and z is a vector 3, and our scale, x, y, and z is a vector 3. It could also be a direction, so a vector 3 forward would be 0, 0, 1, since positive 1 on the z-axis is forward. So we'll basically be using a lot of bools, a lot of floats, and a lot of integers, a string here and there, and then sometimes we'll use a vector 3. So if we go to our variables category, We have global variables, which we can reference from any game object in our scene. Then we have local variables, which are stored on the game object in the plyBlox component. So here I can create a integer called, we'll do count, and I'll hit the plus button. Now my game object plyBlox component has a local variable called count, and it's an integer. So if we were to say on update, if space goes down, let's set our local variable, and I named it count, in self to, and let's add 1 each time I hit the space bar. So we would need a math block, integer a plus b. So let's go to math, integer a plus b, and we want count plus 1. So I'll go back to variables, local variable, count, plus an integer of 1, that's in common, integer of 1. So this local variable will be increased every time I hit the spacebar, and then we can do a debug as well. Our count is, and then we have a null box in our debug block. I can put count right in there. So we can both see in the console our debugs, as well as if we click on the game object, we can see the local integer right in the plyBlox component. And lastly, we have temporary variables. These cannot leave the current event. So if we were to create a temporary variable, we wouldn't be able to reference it in any other event or any other game object. These are strictly for using within a single event. Before I end this video, I wanted to share with you the most important block in all of plyBlox. So if we go to our common category, that's the set property block or the get property block. So here I have on my cube game object in the plyBlox, I have an onStart event, and we'll use the set property value block. And this will allow us to change almost any value on any game object. So here we have a box collider and a mesh renderer. These are components on my game object. So if we wanted to, let's say we wanted to uncheck this receive shadows checkbox while the game is running, we could do, let's do another on update, flow if input key goes down, spacebar. Let's say we wanted to disable receive shadows. So we would simply go to common, grab the set property block, and we can either drag ourselves, the game object we have selected, into the first null box, or we can even grab the component straight out of the inspector and drop the component in. Now if we click back on the block and use the drop down, we have access to all of the public values on that component. So we wanted to change receive shadows, so I'll click that, and you'll see Unity tells me receive shadows is of type Boolean. So we'll go to our common category and we'll use a Boolean block in the second null field. So when we hit spacebar, we're turning receive shadows to false. There it is. So if you ever have a value on one of your components that needs to be changed, you can almost always use the set property value block to achieve those results. That's all for this one. Thanks for watching, and join me next time where we'll be going over plyGame.